Sometimes grief doesn't look like crying. Sometimes it looks like staying busy all the time. Sometimes it looks like getting very short-tempered with people that you love. Sometimes it looks like feeling nothing at all and telling yourself that means that you're fine. And sometimes grief looks like functioning well on the outside while something inside you has quietly gone offline. That's part of what makes grief so hard to recognize, especially when you're the one carrying it. You may think, I'm getting through the day, I'm doing what needs to be done, I'm keeping it together, so maybe I'm handling this. But deep down, there can still be a sense that something isn't moving, something inside you isn't settled, and you just feel stuck or distant, or things feel harder than they should. In this video, I want to help you notice some signs that you may not actually be dealing with your grief and loss, even if life has kept moving, and even if others assume that you're doing okay. I'm not saying this to criticize you. I'm saying it because unprocessed grief often doesn't disappear. It tends to come out sideways. It shows up in your body having problems. It shows up in relationship difficulties, in irritability, in exhaustion, numbness, and in ways that can leave you feeling confused about why life feels so heavy at this point. I'm Eddie Traver. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and for over 30 years, I've walked with people through loss, trauma, broken relationships, and seasons of pain that changed them deeply. One of the things that I've seen over and over again is that many people don't avoid grief because they feel cold or disconnected. They avoid grief because grief feels too big or too disruptive or too painful or to face all at once. So if you hear yourself in any of these signs, I don't want you to hear condemnation. That's not the point of this at all. I want you to hear an invitation toward honesty, toward gentleness toward yourself, toward healing that actually reaches the deep places in your heart and in your mind. So the first sign that you may not be dealing with your grief well is this: you stay busy all the time because stillness feels dangerous. If every quiet moment quickly turns into scrolling, cleaning, working, organizing, helping somebody else, or finding one more task to do, then maybe there's more going on than just productivity. Activity can become a way to outrun contact with what hurts. Now, being busy after a loss is understandable. We all have lots of things to do. There are bills to pay. There are things that truly need our attention. There's paperwork, phone calls, schedules, responsibilities. But for many people, even after the urgent tasks are done, the pace never slows down. The nervous system learns that movement feels safer than stillness because stillness leaves room for grief to come closer. For example, a woman loses her father and suddenly becomes the only one who handles everything for everyone. She's managing details, supporting family, taking on leadership responsibility at work, answering messages, staying useful. And on the outside, she looks strong, but on the inside, she hasn't had 10 honest minutes with her own sorrow. Or another example, a man goes through a very difficult divorce and fills every evening up with errands or working overtime and background noise. He tells himself that he's just staying occupied, but the truth is, silence makes him feel the emptiness. Here's what most people don't realize. Constant busyness can be a form of emotional avoidance. Not because you're weak, but because your system is trying to protect you from overwhelm. The problem is that what we refuse to feel directly often keeps pressing on us indirectly. Now, the second sign that you may not be dealing with grief well is that you get irritated much more easily than before. Grief is often imagined as sadness, but grief can come out as anger as well, or impatience, or having a short fuse. You may notice that small things bother you more than they used to. Noise feels louder, interruptions feel heavier, ordinary requests feel like way too much to handle. That doesn't always mean that you're an angry person. Sometimes it means that you're carrying pain with nowhere for it to go. When grief is not being named, the emotional energy doesn't vanish on its own. It often leaks out in the form of agitation. Your nervous system's already burdened and already strained with everything that's going on, and it's already trying to hold loss. So small things like the dishwasher not being unloaded, traffic being heavier than normal, an unanswered text on your phone, the slow line at the store, all of it lands on a body and a mind that have less room than usual to handle these things. And this can be especially confusing for people who don't feel sad in obvious ways. They think, well, I'm not crying, so this can't be grief. But if you're increasingly reactive, increasingly impatient, increasingly harsh with yourself or others, it may be worth asking whether unprocessed sorrow is sitting underneath the surface. The third sign that you may not be handling grief well is emotional numbness. This one can be hard to talk about because numbness often gets misunderstood. People assume that if they're not crying, they must not care enough. Or if they can talk about the loss calmly, then maybe they've already dealt with it. Not necessarily. Numbness is often a nervous system response to overload. When something is too much to feel all at once, the body and mind can create distance. You may feel flat, detached, foggy thinking, or you may go through the motions of life and notice that things that used to reach you emotionally don't seem to reach you now. For example, you may be at church and the words just feel far away. You may feel disconnected with worship music, or you're with your family and you feel oddly absent. You're remembering someone you loved, but instead of emotion, there's just blankness. That doesn't mean that the grief isn't there. It means the grief is there, but your system is rationing access to it. This is where it starts to shift for some people. They stop asking, why can't I feel anything? And instead they begin asking, what might my numbness be protecting me from? That question creates room for compassion. And compassion matters because shame rarely helps grief move. Safety does. The fourth sign that you may not be dealing with grief well is avoiding reminders of loss at all costs. Now, let me be careful here. In early grief, some reminders can simply be too much. It's normal to have things that you're not ready to face yet. But if months or even years later, you still can't tolerate hearing the person's name or looking at photos that remind you of them, going near certain places, talking about what happened, or allowing any memory to surface without quickly shutting it down, that may be a sign that grief has become frozen rather than processed. Avoidance can feel like control. For example, if I don't go there, I won't fall apart. If I don't think about it, maybe it won't hit me so hard. But the cost of long-term avoidance is that the loss often remains emotionally unintegrated. It stays raw and untouched, suspended right there inside you. For example, a son keeps all of his mother's belongings in boxes for years, not because he's preserving them with intention, but because he can't bear to decide what anything means or what to do with them. Or a woman refuses to drive past the hospital where her husband died. She changes routes, changes routines, changes the subject whenever anybody comes close to the memory. Again, this is not about judgment. It's about noticing whether your life has quietly organized itself around not feeling. The fifth sign that you may not be handling grief well is that your body is carrying what your emotions have not fully spoken. Grief lives in our bodies. It may show up as a tight chest or fatigue, restlessness, stomach issues, shallow breathing, trouble sleeping, trouble waking, heaviness. If you've experienced these things after a loss, it doesn't automatically mean grief is being avoided, but if the body keeps sounding the alarm while you keep telling yourself that you're fine, it may be worth paying attention to. Your body often tells you the truth before your words do. And that matters because many people are much more comfortable analyzing their experience than feeling it. They can explain the timeline, they can summarize what happened, they can even give advice to someone else, but their shoulders are always tight, their jaw is clenched, their breathing is short and shallow, and their sleep cycle's messed up. They're carrying grief physically around while staying emotionally disconnected from it. And here's what most people don't realize. The body is not being dramatic. It may be holding unprocessed attachment pain. It may be carrying the stress of adapting to a reality you still haven't fully let yourself register. So if your body has been louder in some of these ways since the loss, don't ask yourself, what symptom am I having? Instead, ask, what sorrow might my body be trying to help me notice? The sixth sign that you may not be processing or dealing with grief well is that you keep minimizing the loss. And this is a really big one. People do this for lots of reasons. Maybe someone else has suffered more than you, so you tell yourself, I have no right to grieve. Maybe the relationship was complicated, so you tell yourself, well, this shouldn't matter that much. Maybe it wasn't a death. Maybe it was a divorce, an estrangement, a miscarriage, a betrayal, a diagnosis, or a season of life ending. And because it doesn't fit people's idea of grief, you talk yourself out of honoring it. You say things like, it wasn't that bad. Other people have it worse than I do. I should be over this by now. We weren't even that close. At least I still have fill in the blank. And what you're doing, often without realizing it, is placing a lid on pain that still needs room to be processed and dealt with. Minimizing can sound mature. It can even sound spiritual. It can sound very humble. But sometimes it's just another way of refusing to tell the truth about what mattered. And you can't grieve honestly if you keep arguing with the reality that something precious and important or deeply hoped for was lost. There's a verse in Psalm 34 that says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted." And I love that because it doesn't require you to downplay what hurts. It names the brokenhearted as brokenhearted. It tells the truth first. And for many people, that's part of healing. Not exaggerating your pain, but also not minimizing it or editing it down so it feels more acceptable. Now, the seventh sign that you may not be dealing with grief well is that you become emotionally distant in your relationships. When grief isn't being dealt with, people often start pulling back in subtle ways. You may still show up physically, but emotionally you're harder to reach. Conversations stay on the surface. You don't want to answer honestly when people ask you how you're doing. You feel tired of explaining yourself, or maybe closeness itself feels threatening because if someone gets too near, they might also get near to the grief. So you keep it light. You stay useful instead of vulnerable. You listen to everybody else, but offer very little of your own heart. Sometimes people think this means that they need more independence. Sometimes what it really means is that grief has made connection feel costly. And that makes sense. Loss affects attachment. And when a bond is broken, the system can become protective. It can start to expect pain where closeness once brought comfort. But if grief keeps pushing you into isolation, that usually makes healing harder and not easier. Because grief may wound in relationship. And we see that because we get close to someone and they're no longer there, but we also have to realize that healing often requires some form of safe relationship too. Not a large crowd, not constant talking, just one or two grounded places where you don't have to pretend. Now, if you heard one or more of these signs and you thought, that's me, not dealing with my grief, I want to just slow down right here and be very clear. The goal is not to diagnose yourself harshly. The goal is not to say, great, now I'm grieving wrong too. The goal is to become more honest about where grief may still be asking for attention. Because not dealing with grief doesn't usually mean that you're refusing on purpose. More often, it means your system found a way to survive. Stay busy, go numb, stay useful, avoid reminders, keep moving, minimize, disconnect. Those strategies may have helped you get through a season, but what helps you survive a shock is not always what helps you heal. So what do you do if you realize you haven't really been dealing with your grief? I want to encourage you to start small. You don't need to force some huge emotional breakthrough. You don't need to sit down and make yourself cry. And you don't need to become intense in every conversation. Grief responds better to honesty than pressure. First of all, try naming the loss clearly. Not just what happened, but what it meant. I didn't just lose my spouse, I lost my companion and my best friend. I didn't just lose the relationship, I lost the future I thought I was building with someone. I didn't just lose a parent, I lost the person that I still wanted approval from. That level of truth helps grief become more specific, and when grief becomes more specific, it often becomes more workable. Then notice where you feel it, physically, in your chest, in your throat, in your stomach, in the heaviness that shows up every evening while you sit by yourself. Let your body be part of the conversation. And if there's one safe person in your life, practice a little more honesty than normal with them. Not everything, just a little more. Enough to stop carrying the whole burden around behind closed doors. If faith is a part of your life, bring grief to God in plain language. You don't have to make it polished. You don't have to sound resolved. Sometimes the most faithful prayer is simply, Lord, I think I've been avoiding this. Help me face what hurts without getting lost in it. That kind of prayer has truth in it, and truth is often where healing begins. Before we end, I want to leave you with this. If you haven't really been dealing with your grief, that doesn't mean that it's too late. It doesn't mean healing has passed you by. It means there may be a door that you've had to keep closed for a while, and now you may be ready to open it just a little more carefully, a little more safely, and a little more honestly. Grief asks for courage, but not usually the loud kind. It usually asks for quiet courage. The courage to stop minimizing, the courage to sit for just a few minutes and see what comes up emotionally, the courage to tell the truth about what still hurts, or the courage to receive support instead of only giving it. And if even one of these signs helped you recognize something in yourself then that's meaningful. Awareness is not the end of healing, but it's often the beginning of it. If this video connected with you where you are, you may want to watch another one of my videos on what grief looks like in the body and nervous system, or on why grief can leave you feeling stuck even if life has moved on around you. Take care of yourself. See you next time.